Good morning, Commissioner Eskridge. Can you hear us okay?
I can, thank you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Paul. Can you hear us as well?
Try this again. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It's 9 a.m. I'm Tom Hobble, President of the Commission, and I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to all of our guests that were here in person or virtually. Cassie, would you like to go through the virtual meeting guidance?
Yes. Good morning, Commissioners, members of the public, and staff. To help us have a smooth meeting, I'm going to review just a few decorum rules for all. While the Commission and staff are in person, we are still offering a Zoom option so members of the public can attend. If you are attending virtually and would like to speak, you can do so during appearances by the public. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube, and the public chat has been disabled, but you can still send messages to the host if need be. Finally, Commissioners, there are two new things to notice with our room arrangement so we can optimize our room audio. Number one, speakers will be sitting next to President Hobble so they can better see their presentation and also speak directly into the mic. Number two, the table mics have been placed closer to you at the table to better pick up sound. Please ensure your mic is off if you are not speaking so others can utilize the mic. As a reminder, only 3 of the table mics can be live at a time. Also, please ensure you state your name before speaking for those that may be joining us via Zoom. Those are the decorum rules of the District Commission, and thank you for following them, and let's have a great meeting.
Okay, thank you, Cassie. Any announcements, Bill?
Yes, this is Bill Walker, Interim Executive Director. I want to expand a little bit on what Cassie went through. We are trying to make this meeting more accessible to those who are listening online and who will listen to the recording later. One of the things that has been very clear to us is that failing to speak into the microphone has made this meeting inaccessible to a lot of people. The point of the card in front of you is to be in the way of the button so that you are reminded to think a little bit. The other thing I want to talk through is you're watching the way I'm talking into this microphone. I'm doing what the card suggests. I'm a few inches from it. You may also notice that when I turn to look at someone, my head tips to the side so that I'm still talking into the microphone. This is basic stuff, but I'm pointing it out to you because most of the people who present in this room don't do this. Instead, we do what Lena Lamont used to do in the Sound of the Music, Singing in the Rain movie, just to talk at the microphone and then slowly turn your head to the side. Nobody can hear what you're saying, and then gradually bring your head back so that people can hear. That's not what we're going to do anymore. And I'm trying to be funny and charming, but this is actually very important because the whole point of this hybrid option is so that people can attend our meetings virtually. And I have appointed myself the person who's going to remind everyone who comes up here, A, to introduce yourself if President Hubble hasn't already done it, and B, to do this correct mic technique. I look forward to that, or prevent me from needing to do it by doing what the card says on your own. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Bill. That will take us to appearances by the public. Anybody from the public wish to make a comment, either in-house or virtually? I don't see any hands up virtually, and I don't see any hands up in the room either. So we'll move on to the consent calendar, where we have the approval of the minutes from the last meeting, approval of cash statement operating. We have 3 sanitary sewer extension plans. We have review and bids and award a contract for Way Well Coating Project. And we have the approval of transaction amount for solids handling glass line valve purchases. Do we have any questions on any of these before we get a motion? Seeing no questions, do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
This is Commissioner Freeze. I'll move approval. And Commissioner Wilson. I'll second.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Freeze, second by Commissioner Wilson to approve the consent calendar. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carries. That will take us to topics where we have the review of proposal and award of contract for the executive director search firm. So Mike Lipsky, we don't have a PowerPoint or anything from what I understand, but Mike Lipsky will kind of give a brief introduction, and then we have obviously 4 of our commissioners who are on the subcommittee and did the interviews.
Thank you, President Hubble. Mike Lipsky, HR Director for the district. Just a note that this contract is to conduct the executive director search. The executive director search subcommittee worked with me on developing the request for proposal, which outlined the scope of work that the commission is seeking for this search. We had an initial scoring committee that consisted of Commissioner Bookland and various HR staff. Following the scores, 3 firms were invited to interview in front of the scoring committee and the entire executive director subcommittee. Following debriefing, Reftelis was the firm that was a unanimous number 1. Key elements in Reftelis's favor included a competitive price, not the lowest, but certainly not the highest. Reftelis has specific experience working not only in the public sector, but with utilities. They provided a diverse recruitment team that would be working on this process, including people on that recruitment team who have specific utility experience. The process that they described aligned with the vision of the subcommittee. Before the recruitment, Reftelis will be engaging with the commission, staff and owners. We'll be able to share some of the work that we have done in this area as it relates to staff and owner community engagement, but definitely the firm wants to meet and make sure that their process is going to be aligned with what the commission is looking for. The recruitment will include access to a variety of sources, including those dedicated to finding diverse candidates. And the finalist process that they described would include interviews, engagement with district directors, EO staff, and engagement with owner communities, which is going to be worked out with the commission. But that's, again, something that aligned with the subcommittee's vision. Reftelis has lots of experience working with councils and commissions as a hiring authority, and part of the Reftelis contract includes a guarantee that, if the executive director leaves within a year, that they would find and conduct another search for us. That is an extra $9,000 on the contract, but included in that $9,000, they would be conducting a facilitated evaluation process with the new executive director and the commission after 6 months. So that's a value add that Reftelis includes as part of that guarantee. So for these reasons, the recommendation is to approve the resolution adopting this.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Any questions or comments before we get a motion? Commissioner Wilson?
Just one question. Was the subcommittee recommends this also? The subcommittee recommends this also?
Yes, the subcommittee on was 4-0 in recommending Reftelis, so it was unanimous consent by the subcommittee. We had good presentations and discussions by all firms, and I think Mike went through the reasons why they kind of rose to the top in the mind of every one of the subcommittee members. Spent about an hour, I think, discussing it. Okay.
Then I don't have any questions. I'll make a motion to approve the recommendation as presented.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Wilson.
I'll second that, Tom. Commissioner Clark, and that would be option number 1.
Yep.
Correct.
Yep, for A, for the executive firm, for Reftelis,
With the guarantee, and Commissioner Wilson again.
Yes.
With the guarantee,
With the guarantee.
And with the 10%.
Yes. Right. Okay, so the 10% includes the 10% contingency and the, was it 9,000 or 8,000 for the guarantee? Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by Commissioner Clark. Any further discussion?
Just to be crystal clear, to answer Commissioner Wilson's question, it says staff recommendation, but it is the subcommittee's recommendation as well. So thank you.
Yep, okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike. Okay, the Executive Director Search Committee met at 7:30 a.m. this morning. We started going through the job description. We made some partial progress. What we're going to do is the subcommittee members are going to get to Mike kind of some lists of comments or additions or whatever subtractions that they would have on the remainder of the job description. He will get us a red line version. We're going to discuss that again on August 8th. And we were originally anticipating having a study session on the job description on August 8th at the full commission, but we don't think we're going to be ready for that because we're going to still be going through it. So we will then get a red line version of Mike's got one put together that's not red lined of the original one because there's a lot of different changes, but from Michael's. But we'll get a version to you sometime before the 22nd, and the commission, the subcommittee will meet again on August 22nd. Mike won't be there, but we'll go through it, make sure we're all happy with it, and then we'll be presenting it to the commission at 9 a.m. on the 22nd for approval. And we want to let you know that we will then be engaging with Reftelis as to, and they will probably be, they may be at our 8th meeting and maybe at our 22nd meeting, so they know where we sit with the job description, and they may make some tweaks, so that might come back to us, but we want to have commission approval on the full thing. One other thing I wanted to mention is, I probably should have mentioned in the prior, is that we did ask all of the firms if they have experience with large groups doing interviews, and they all do, because a lot of times they work with councils and, you know, where they're 8 to 10 members, we're a 9-member. So I keep bringing up that at some point we're going to have to make a decision who we want to do the interviews of candidates that are presented to us. So I'm just forwarding that for everybody to keep in mind. And as Tom has mentioned, it should be the same consistent body that does it. So if we have different days of interviews or something and you can't make one, then obviously that's an issue. But I just want to be clear on that. Okay, that will lead us to anything else that anybody else wants to say on the executive director search. Okay, that will take us to the project update, the 2024 Employment Engagement Survey. Mike, you're back up.
Thank you, President Hubble. I am back up. Mike Litsky, HR Director. Happy to be here talking about our 2024 Employee Engagement Survey. And I have Amy Deming, Organizational Development Specialist, with me as well. We're going to go through a presentation today on our employee engagement results and talk about just some of the highlights that came out of the survey. Be aware, you're going to be talking about district results today. This is the organization at a high level, but much of the work that's done around the employee engagement survey is done at the team level, and individual team results do vary from these district results, but it's very exciting because we have year-over-year data now that we can talk about since this is our second annual survey. So when we talk about the employee engagement survey, as we've demonstrated the process in the past, we do a survey, we analyze and share results. We have team conversations where teams can talk about those results and develop action plans around a particular item in the survey. And there's an opportunity for them to implement that action plan, followed by reflection on whether or not that action plan had the intended results. So now that we're in the second annual process, we've done the survey and we are in the analyzing and share phase. So we're here today to present you these overall district results. Just a reminder, we're using the Gallup's Q12 survey, and then we've added some supplemental questions specific to the district that were part of the Gallup database. But the reason that we're using Gallup's survey is because there's lots of data supporting the Gallup survey and what results mean, and has ideas for action plans based on the items that teams choose to work on. So it's a widely used survey. It does allow for actionable items to be taken with regards to the issues and the questions that are asked. The survey is conducted online, and the results that we get from Gallup are completely confidential. We can't report results in groups of less than 4. When you look at that slide, you'll see the pyramid. And the pyramid reflects the different questions of the survey and how they relate to the Gallup hierarchy of needs. This becomes important because you're going to see later in the presentation our high scores and our low scores, and those are weighted based on where those questions fall in this pyramid. So questions 1 and 2 relate to employee basic needs, and these are questions around knowing what an employee is expected to do on the job and having the materials and equipment to perform the work. To Gallup, these are really, really important that even though we might have a higher raw score in some of these items than others, it may still be a lower item because of the way they weight these questions. Individual contribution questions are around having the opportunity to do what I do best every day at work, receiving praise and recognition at work for doing good work, having a manager that cares for me as a person, and having someone at work who encourages my development. Teamwork questions include my opinions seem to count, the mission and purpose of my company makes me feel my job is important, having coworkers committed to quality work, and having a best friend at work. And then finally, those last 2 questions up at the top around growth are around someone at work talking to me about my progress and having the opportunities to learn and grow at work. So Gallup will take the individual results and through its proprietary formulas can tell whether or not employees fall into 1 of 3 categories. And these are Gallup definitions, and these are Gallup labels for these categories. So they label employees into 3 different categories: engaged, not engaged, or actively disengaged. We're hoping for that smiley face with the hearts. A lot of engaged employees. These are employees who are highly involved and enthusiastic about their work. They're the kind of people that'll go home and talk to all of their friends about what a great place this is to work and try and get them to come and work here too. Those are what we want. The middle category, though, not engaged. These are people who come to work. You might have very high performers in this category. They're going to come in, they're going to do their job, but when the time clock turns to 5 o'clock, they're going to go home and they're going to live their life. Having non-engaged employees is not a negative, but ideally we would love to see those employees move into that engaged category. And then the last category is actively disengaged, and these are employees who are unhappy and dissatisfied with the workplace and potentially not afraid to let everybody know about it. The key about these categories is you can move. You know, you can move from actively disengaged to not engaged to engaged. Unfortunately, you could also move from engaged to not engaged or actively disengaged. So the goal is have a great workforce of engaged employees and keep people there. So how are we doing? Well, if we compare, there we go. If we look from last year to this year, last year 32% of our workforce was engaged, and this year we ended up with 40% of our workforce in that engaged category. And engaged, we saw changes both in the not engaged and the actively disengaged to make up for that 8% change. So again, important to see employees can move, and at least from last year to this year, our movement was in the right direction. We saw a jump in the engaged and a drop in both the not engaged and the actively disengaged. So how does that compare to national statistics? You can see that our engaged number of 40% is 10% greater than the engaged number nationally, and our actively disengaged number is significantly lower than the engaged number nationally. And then finally, looking at it another way, we have 5.71 engaged employees to every one actively disengaged employee. And at a national level, that ratio is only 1.8 to 1. So again, our district numbers as it relates to engaged versus actively disengaged employees look very positive. With that, I'll turn it over to Amy.
Thanks, Mike. So diving into the results just a little bit, an overall snapshot, our engagement mean was a 3.92. Our mean percentile rank, we were in the 30th percentile compared to Gallup's database for utilities. That was kind of, none of them are a perfect comparison, but that was kind of the closest one. I'll note that we changed our database this year. Last year, our comparison database was utilities taking the survey for the first time. We've kind of graduated into the deep end of the database comparisons, and you may see our percentile rank sort of lower than last year, even when our scores are higher because of that. This is reflected in the engagement index and the overall engagement results, but there is a little bump up in terms of the overall change. And then we did have a strong response rate of 86% on the survey. So Mike mentioned before that the Q12 items are weighted. I think, though, these are the true high scores, but the two highest Q12 items on the survey were question 8, the mission or purpose of my company makes me feel my job is important. And then question 9, my coworkers are committed to doing quality work. And both of those were up a little bit from last year. Sort of the threshold that Gallup has for significance in year-over-year comparison is 0.2, and so that's why you see the little triangle for question 9, with that being 0.24 above last year. The two lowest items, and these are not the lowest scores on the Q12 questions, but based on where they sit, when you think about that pyramid diagram we saw before, these are closer to the bottom of the pyramid, so we're seen as more foundational engagement needs. And that factored into the weighting. Question 1, I know what is expected of me at work, which is just very slightly down from last year, but below that 0.2 difference. And then question 3, at work I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. And then I won't go through each individual question, but these are just sort of the changes from last year that were more than that 0.2 difference. We didn't have any questions that were below, that dropped more than 0.2, so that's why all the arrows are up on this. But, it was a question related to recognition and praise, encouraging development, opinions seeming to count, coworkers being committed to doing quality work, and someone talking about progress. Those were all just over that 0.2 threshold. So Mike mentioned there were some additional questions besides Gallup's Q12, and these are kind of the notable changes in that. The question relating to coworkers reporting errors, near misses, and unsafe acts, having the same opportunities for advancement as coworkers, trusting the leadership of the organization, and then leaders helping employees see how changes made affect the future. And then just kind of looking across the board, the trust in the leadership of the organization is the item that had the biggest change from last year. So Mike mentioned, this is overall results and that team scores varied. This is just kind of taking a few snapshot, like the Q12 mean, the overall satisfaction question, and then one question from each of the additional categories, and kind of mapping out where those fall, or the range, right, in minimum and maximum scores at the team level. So you'll see there's quite a bit of range on some of these if you were to look at the team level. So just something interesting to note related to that. We also did some descriptive comparison on looking at gender, and kind of the highlight from that is that when you're looking at the percent engaged compared to last year, there was quite a bump in the percentage of men that are engaged at the district. When you look at our 2023 results, a lot more women were engaged than men, and that gap has closed a little bit, but women's engagement scores went, or the percent of women who were engaged went down just slightly. So that closing of the gap was due to an increase in men's engagement. And then just looking at changes from 2023, kind of just a snapshot. The report that you saw kind of went into this in more detail, but looking at the Q12 mean and then a few of those additional questions, we can see in the Q12 mean and the overall satisfaction question a slight change in women's scores there. But on the questions that are related to, two of the questions that are related to belonging and inclusion, being treated with respect, being comfortable being myself, there was actually an increase compared to last year in women's scores. Having the same opportunities to advance, there was just an increase in men's scores and a smaller increase of women's scores. We also looked at comparison based on race and ethnicity. Because of the small number of employees that are, most of our employees are white, and then each of the other demographic groups was very small, so we had to kind of combine them to be able to do a comparison. So there wasn't a large enough number to get that percent engaged that we saw in the gender comparison, so we're just looking at sort of the question piece of things. And compared to last year, there was an increase for white employees, and then there were some decreases for employees of color at the district related to overall satisfaction, and then a couple of those additional questions relating to belonging and inclusion, being treated with respect, being comfortable being myself. This is the population size for employees of color is small. It's like 12 people, so it's you see more swings when you have a smaller population than when you have a larger population. So that's just something to note in looking at this, not diminishing sort of the experiences that each individual who took the survey had, but just sort of noting that when you're in a larger population, there's a lot of times less swing. And then just kind of overall big picture takeaways, right? We kind of dove down a little bit into the details of the survey and pulling back to the big picture. Overall, positive. Our percentage of engaged employees at the district far surpasses national averages. And then our overall trend is slightly positive compared to last year. When we're looking at the comparisons, there are variations in engagement trends when you're looking at work groups and demographic groups. And then when you're looking at percentile rankings and scores and things, there are opportunities to improve engagement as well at both the team and the organizational level. As far as the next steps, so as we've been saying since the beginning, and you kind of think about the wheel, right? The survey is just like kind of a launching point for taking action. And so team conversations and action planning has already started. There's teams that have already met and had their team conversation, and teams that will be continuing to meet through the summer and in early September with a goal to have all those action plans submitted by the end of September. And then our district leadership will also be undertaking state of the team and state of the district work as well. Are there any questions?
Okay, anybody have any questions? Beth?
This is Commissioner Buckland, and I just have a question. The results look great, and thank you for presenting, really clear. On slide number 12, trust in leadership of my organization went up, and it seemed like it went up quite a bit compared to some of the others. What do we attribute that to? Do we have any ideas on that?
I mean, I think, we could speculate. I think we'd have to dig into individual team conversations and, see if people are, what the teams have to say at that level. But, I mean, the survey was done in the end of May, beginning of June. So, leadership change in the organization, employees were aware of that. Whether that had an impact on the results would merely be speculation. But, I mean, it's definitely the highest scoring. The raw score itself is still not particularly high, so it's definitely something we'd still want to be attuned to.
Okay, anyone else? I got a question. You compare it to national. Do they have like a group for like government or smaller that we could see how, rather than just all national, because I'm sure that includes private, public, all various firms? Is there something that's more our level, like governmental level or even wastewater?
So we debated, there's the other comparison, and last year, because we didn't have the year-over-year comparison, there were actually two databases we included in your report. And the other one that we thought was close is there's a state and local government category that is also a comparison. In terms of rankings, it wasn't really that different when I looked at the two. And so we just sort of, present that year-over-year data, you're limited in what you can fit on the one report. So we went with utilities. But yes, that would probably be the closest. And I think when we get to, year 5, we can compare against utilities that are also in their 5th year, which is kind of interesting as far as just sort of the maturity of the engagement effort as being another factor to weigh in. That right now, being kind of in that big utility group, that varies.
And Amy, just to clarify, when we talk about the percent engaged versus not engaged versus actively disengaged, they don't break that down within those groups, correct? We only have the national numbers that we can compare ourselves to.
That's correct, yeah. So, and the national numbers are pulled from basically reports that Gallup releases a few times a year. So they don't do that percent engaged in the industry comparison databases. That's a good clarification, thanks.
Thank you.
President Hubble, Commissioner Eskridge has her hand raised.
Okay, Commissioner Eskridge.
Thank you. Thanks for this great work and update, Mike and Amy. I really appreciated the point in some of the materials about the small numbers, particularly for women and employees of color, and frankly, the the change that we see there, being sensitive to, how we manage and consider that. So I'm curious, just in terms of next steps, looking at some of those changes, are we thinking that what we're seeing there is going to be mostly addressed in the kind of district-wide and district leadership assessment? Is there a role for our DEI work to consider these results? Like, how are we processing the difference between gender and racial implications that we saw in the data, especially considering the low numbers?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I've been thinking about it quite a bit, and I think that, I always look at sort of how you can triangulate other data as well as just, experiences. I think I'm also sensitive about, you don't want to put people in the spotlight or pull everyone in a particular group together in a focus group when the group is that small. So while if we were a larger organization, I think that could be an option and feel more comfortable for people. But yeah, I think that all those things you mentioned play a role. I think thinking about, different training initiatives that I've done, I've been able to kind of gather a little bit of data related to employee experience that way. There's other opportunities to gather, I think, qualitative and quantitative data about employee experience that could help inform what's happening.
Great. Thanks for that very intentional work, Amy. And just kind of to highlight, I think that, at least for me, was the biggest takeaway and concern and opportunity. And so I appreciate, just as terms of focus moving forward, that you all will be diving into that in the most appropriate ways possible. So thanks.
Okay. Ezra, you have your?
Thanks, Tom. Ezra Meyer, Commissioner Meyer. I'll just echo the, real thanks for the good work and good report on this today. And then I just wanted to make a point, at the risk of embarrassing Amy, but I've been noticing, as we have Amy's involvement in the process around the ED search, and then I think we're all reminded here today that the fact that we have an organizational development specialist on staff, have made that a priority, make this work a priority, which I think we're going to keep doing in the future. I really hope we will. It's great. I mean, we set ourselves up for success by doing all this good stuff and making it an intentional priority. So thanks, Amy, and let's keep it up.
Okay, Mike?
Just one follow-up question for the commission. Last year, we came back to you, I believe, January, February, after team action plans had been developed, just with a summary of action plans. Does the commission want a similar presentation at the same time next year so that we can keep you apprised as to what's going on?
I see thumbs up.
Perfect.
Excuse me. Thank you. That will move us to the basics of bonding study session. Ben Nerad, you're going to do the introduction?
While the team comes up, this is Bill Walker. There's something I forgot to mention at the beginning of the meeting, which is relevant context for both of the next presentations. The reason we have a municipal advisory firm and are talking about bonding is because the state's Clean Water Fund loan program is oversubscribed, as you know. We recently got a note from DNR that two of the long shot projects that we submitted for funding are very tentatively approved, which does change the mix a little bit, but it doesn't change it entirely. The program is still oversubscribed, and we still are going to require some degree of bonding. We are currently, you'll hear more about this at the next commission meeting, but we are currently forecasting 20% bonding, 80% Clean Water Fund financing for our financed projects. And the other point I want to make here is a personal one. Working with PFM has already demonstrated real value for us, not just on bonding, but on overall review of our finances, guidance on how to think about things like reserves and so on. And so I'm grateful we have them here. That's all.
Before we get started, just let you know that Commissioner Eskridge is participating virtually. Now, is Commissioner Rummel on or not? She never showed. Okay. So we have two commissioners that are absent, so if you could leave those books, or they could scan it and send it to them or something, so they have that. I guess you usually put this up on the website anyway. Okay. Okay, Ben.
Hello, Ben Nered, policy advisor with the district. I'm not Paul Kent, as the nameplate says. Paul, borrowing your seat today. So just to echo Bill's comments here, you know, in terms of just very briefly how we got to where we are today. As you all know, in late February, we learned that the Clean Water Fund program would be oversubscribed, right? And ultimately, that resulted in pursuing an RFP for a financial advisor, and the commission approved the contract with PFM that resulted from that RFP at the end of May. So we've been working with PFM, primarily who's joining us today. We've got Matt Schnackenberg and Kristen Hansen from PFM, who will be doing the presentation. And, you know, we've had the opportunity to learn a lot. It's a little bit like drinking from the fire hose at times, just in terms of all the considerations around bonding. But it's been extremely helpful to have them here. And we thought it would be valuable to bring some of those learnings to the commission as well. So our goal for today is to give you all an opportunity to learn some of what we've learned, give you an opportunity to ask questions if you have them, and feel free to ask questions as we go through the presentation, and also just, you know, meet the staff that we're working with at PFM as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Matt and Kristen.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Kristen Hansen. I'm a director and financial advisor at PFM. I'm based out of our Milwaukee office. I have been in public finance for over 30 years. And I'd like to thank the president and the commission for welcoming us here to make this presentation and for selecting us to work with the district. So we have the PowerPoint, you also the handout. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Matt to introduce himself and start talking about our firm.
All right, good morning, commissioners, and thank you once again for having us here to go over kind of a public finance overview. We'll try to do it as quickly as we can, keep it high level, but please ask questions. So just starting on, well, I'll give a little introduction to myself. Matt Schnackenberg, I'm a managing director out of our Minneapolis office. I have been in public finance for 19 years, worked at PFM for 19 years. I work on a variety of projects throughout the country, including other sewer districts, and state revolving funds, including the state of Wisconsin. Okay, starting on slide 2, we just want to give a quick overview of who we are as a company. PFM has been around for almost 50 years at this point. Next year will be our 50-year anniversary. We are a full-service financial advisory firm, and that's kind of, we have other services here listed. We're just going to focus on the financial advisory because that's what we were hired for here today. So moving on to slide 3, again, just kind of another page showing our different services that we offer. Again, the focus here is financial advisory and some financial planning as well. Slide 4, just want to go over quickly. PFM is an independent financial advisor, meaning we don't underwrite bonds. We only serve the issuers, you, the district, as the issuer. And so just, I want to commend the district for hiring an independent financial advisor, whether it was PFM or someone else. I think it's very important to have that person in your corner working with you and in your best interest. So we do have a fiduciary responsibility to our clients, no one else. Slide 5, This is just showing a little bit about who we are, where we're located. You see the stars here, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, people who are here today. We have over 300 employees throughout the country. We are based in Philadelphia. And we just also wanted to show this little graphic in the bottom right-hand corner. Just that's our water and sewer experience. This is from last year, in 2023 for the full year. So PFM was ranked number 1 in terms of PAR that was issued. PAR is the principal amount or the amount that you are borrowing. Slide 6 just gives a sample of some of our clients throughout the country. I do work with several of these, amongst others throughout the country. So this just gives you an idea of kind of our breadth and our depth of service.
I just want to interject briefly. You'll see here PFM works with New Water, so kind of our sister utility, so to speak, in Green Bay. And, you know, in those days following the news of the Clean Water Fund program shortage earlier this year, you know, we were talking to Green Bay and other utilities as well, but we asked Green Bay, you know, what are you guys thinking? What are you guys doing? And I think what we heard was, well, Kristen just came up and, you know, we're talking together and we're figuring out a plan. And so just want to emphasize that point, you know, one, familiarity obviously with Wisconsin utilities and again, the value of having someone that we can call on in these cases when we have unforeseen, you know, financing issues that come up. That's very valuable, so.
And how long have you worked with Green Bay?
I've worked with Green Bay since 2018. And PFM has worked longer than that.
And I'll just say to Ben's point with the state of Wisconsin's SRF program kind of limiting, that is not a unique problem throughout the country. Several of my SRF clients are starting to limit those because there's been so much demand throughout the country. And part of that demand is a lot of federal funding coming in pipeline. And so people are trying to take advantage of that. So to me, that means federal infusion of cash is working. Slide 7, I will turn it over to Kristen.
Before I talk about why issue bonds, you're probably thinking, what is a bond? And so a bond is a loan between an issuer, like you, and an investor, which is a fixed rate security. That's what we call it in our industry. We have a lot of our own language, so we'll try to make sure we don't speak in acronyms. And so bonds are used by municipalities and states and authorities to finance public projects and activities, a lot of capital projects. So the projects that you typically discuss that you're financing with the Clean Water Fund loans. And so you as the issuer agree to pay back PAR, the amount of the bonds, return on investment, plus interest over time. So you're agreeing to the bondholders that you're going to pay them back. Not dissimilar than the Clean Water Fund loan, but there's a different set of regulations, which we will talk about. So there's typically two main reasons to issue bonds. That would be for new money bonds to finance projects. And that would be the projects like Clean Water Fund Loan Program projects. And then there's refunding bonds, which is to refinance existing bonds at a lower interest rate to save money, not dissimilar to refinancing, you know, a mortgage. So those are the two main reasons. Obviously, there's a lot of nuances in this industry, but we're going to kind of try to keep this at a high level. So there are lots of laws that kind of regulate the issuance of bonds. We are guided by federal laws and regulations. The IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, wants to make sure that you're in tax compliance. Most of the debt is issued as tax exempt, and so there's rules you have to follow. The use of the proceeds typically have to be used for capital projects. You don't see tax exempt bonds being issued to finance operating expenditures. There is arbitrage yield restriction and rebate, and arbitrage is basically earning money on borrowed tax exempt money. And we do have like in the appendix, a link to a glossary of terms that you can use. Look at all of the things that we need to know, and if you have trouble sleeping, it's a lovely opportunity for reading. And then there is, once you do issue bonds, there's a whole series of records retention that you have to follow. We are also guided by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Matt and I are both registered Series 50 financial advisors, which we have to be in order to talk to you. But when you go to market, there is an initial disclosure, an offering document that gets prepared for the investors. And there's continuing disclosure. So once you issue debt, you may have an annual requirement to file a report of both your operating and financial statements. If something happens, a material event, you're required to file within 10 days a notice, whether this is a rating change or even a bond rating increase or decrease, things like that. And then there are cases where you may want to do voluntary disclosure. You are also regulated by your state statutes. There's debt limit, which you may have heard discussed. There's the legal authority for issuing different types of debt based on state statutes. And then there's certain required actions needed to take place to bring debt to market. So we have calculated your debt limit, and your debt limit is equal to 5% of the equalized value of the district. So as you can see, legal debt limit before considering any of your outstanding debt is $3.6 billion. Currently using about $117 million, which leaves $3.5 billion available for you to issue in debt. Debt limit is a limit. It's not an affordability issue. I don't want to max your credit card at all. So you can see your remaining borrowing capacity is, 96.8%. But this is still obviously you're operating within the limit of your debt limit. So you are able to issue different types of debt. As you know, you're very familiar with the Clean Water Fund loans. As you know, the pros of these loans is that the loans are funded with debt issued by the state of Wisconsin, currently rated AA1, AA+, AA+, and at a subsidized rate. So you can see currently that rate is 2.365 for up to 20 years and 2.475 for greater than that, and that you draw down the funds as needed. You're very familiar with this program. Obviously, the cons, as Matt mentioned, is the current limitations just based on the availability of the funds. The debt service schedule that you pay back is not customizable. There are some federal requirements. The term of the loan is limited to 30 years, and that every draw requires some paperwork. I know it's getting easier than it used to be. So the debt that's available, if you're going to go to the market, there's two types of debt available for you. That would be general obligation notes or bonds. And typically, those can be issued up to 20 years if you are just a regular municipality. However, you can issue them up to 50 years for sewerage purposes. So you fall into a separate category, so you have a little bit more flexibility to go longer. The interest rates are higher than the Clean Water Fund loans, but they're lower than revenue bonds. So you may have heard of revenue bonds. And then the sewage system revenue bonds, they can be issued up to 40 years, and that principal must be paid not later than 3 years after the date of issue. And so there's as you can start to see, there's rules. And this is what we help guide you through, is the various rules and structures to kind of meet the goals of the district. So the pros of issuing general obligation bonds, and the legislature changed the rules that you can now issue notes for up to 20 years. The length of the borrowing can exceed that 30-year loan. 30 years, that's limited by the Clean Water Fund loans. And you have flexibility in changing how you structure the debt. So, for a mortgage, we always have kind of, equal interest or payments on an annual or monthly basis. With bonds, you can, have lower amounts maturing earlier and higher amounts later. And these are things we'll work with, to try to meet the needs of yours so you don't see kind of spikes and valleys with issuing your debt. And there's lower interest rates than revenue bonds. As I mentioned, the cons are there's higher interest rates than the Clean Water Fund loans. There are additional costs of borrowing, underwriting costs, rating agency fees for us. And that the entire amount of the debt, when you issue it, you get it up front and you start paying on it, different than the draw Clean Water Fund loans. Revenue bonds are not necessarily something we're going to recommend, but the length of that borrowing can exceed the 30 years, and you have more flexibility in structuring the repayment schedule. But it's higher interest rates than both the Clean Water Fund loans and the GO bonds, and a little bit less flexibility in structuring the payments than GO debt. They also have the additional cost of issuance. There's debt service coverage requirements. They may require a debt service reserve. So, but just so you know what your options are. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt to talk about what the process looks like.
Okay. Oh, question?
Commissioner Meyer here. I just thought this might be a good place to ask. I think it's always a good question to ask when you're borrowing money. Can you pay back early? Are there penalties? How does that question fit in the case of both of these kinds of bonding you've outlined?
Yeah, with public issuances, you typically put what's called a call date on those bonds, and it's pretty standard is 10 years out, then you can call those bonds. And you can refinance at that time if you want to either restructure the bonds. Typically, it's done for savings. So that's the very high level explanation, but happy to get into more.
I may be getting ahead of ourselves in terms of detail, but just thinking about whether bonds could be used as an interim financing mechanism, and then a couple years down the road, the Clean Water Fund is flush, and those great subsidized rates are even better. Let's jump over there. But can't you do that with bonding? Is kind of what I'm driving at.
Yep, absolutely. You could issue there are a couple options. You could issue long-term debt with a short call. Now that could be a little more expensive, depending on the market, but more than likely it'll be more expensive. You could also issue short-term bonds, so 1, 2, 3 years, 5 years, something shorter term. In anticipation of some other financing. I will note that typically your Clean Water Fund loans are your cheapest. So that is kind of the first place to go. That's why you have always gone there. And so that's the first look. And if that's not available, like we're maybe running into now, then we look elsewhere.
Eric?
Yeah, Eric Dundee, District Principal Engineer. For the commissioners, this is a point where you should stop and think. So when we bid projects, we decide at the beginning if there's going to be Clean Water Fund loan funding, because there's certain requirements that we have to meet with the bidding, with all of that. So in this case, for Commissioner Meyer, some of that thought process, we have to make that decision up front. Even to have the ability to get a Clean Water Fund loan later. So that would be something that we would think about with each project.
Yep, great point. We do highlight that on slide 10. There are federal requirements, BABA, Build America, Buy America, Davis-Bacon, federal prevailing wage requirements. So, slide 15. We just wanted to point out kind of the different players in a public finance issuance. You have yourselves, the issuer, right there in the middle. You have the municipal advisor up in the upper left-hand corner, and I'll just kind of go clockwise from there. Then you have a bond counsel, who you have on your Clean Water Funds as well. Then if you're doing a negotiated sale, you'll have an underwriter that you select ahead of time. If it's a competitor, the underwriter, if it's a competitive issuance, then the underwriter will bid for those bonds. So it's not selected, it's based on their bid, and we take low bid. And then for negotiated deals, the underwriter will have an underwriter's counsel as well. And note that the underwriter and the underwriter's counsel represent the investors. And you have your rating agencies. The three main rating agencies are Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. Typically want at least one of those when you're going for a public issuance. We included credit enhancers on here. That's going to be something like insurance. If for some lower rated or unrated bonds, they'll get purchase insurance to increase their rating, and so they'll get a lower rate on their bonds, but they will have to pay an insurance premium for that. What is also acts as a credit enhancer for you all is the general obligation pledge that you can put on these bonds. Instead of just revenues, now investors are not necessarily just looking at the revenues that the system is bringing in, but they're also looking at that general obligation pledge, and that's really their focus, because it is typically the most secure pledge that you can have. And then there's a verification agent. Those are used in refundings. And then you have your paying agent or trustee, and they help they pay the company that pays the bonds. And they can hold funds as well. Moving on to slide 16. Of course,
just real quick, Commissioner Eskridge has her hand raised.
Sorry to jump in. Just can you explain? I'm not sure I'm understanding the GO pledge, the general obligation pledge. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yes, certainly. So the general obligation pledge gives you the ability to levy property taxes.
Oh, right.
There is a shortfall in revenues. So the goal is, of course, to pay these bonds back with your revenues and not have to utilize the general obligation or the levy.
But because we have that ability, it's like an extra guarantee for them, which is helpful.
That's exactly right.
Okay, thank you.
So slide 16, there are, of course, costs of issuance related to bond issuances. Most of these I kind of went through on the previous page, but you have your ratings that you'll need to pay for, bond counsel, financial advisor, your trustee or paying agent, and then there's what we call a printer. Typically, the disclosure statements are not actually printed, but they are posted online and disseminated to various interested parties like investors and underwriters. And then there are kind of some other miscellaneous ones that I have there that don't always impact. And then there's the underwriter's discount as well. And that's how the purchasers of the bonds get paid by the investors.
Matt, could you briefly just speak to our ability to roll some of those costs into kind of the bond itself? And
Great point. All of these costs here can be rolled into the bond issue itself. You will not have to pay out of pocket. You do not need to budget for it. It can come right out of the bond itself. So the bond will be upsized slightly to account for these costs.
Okay, I got a question on that. Because you typically don't want to be bonding for operational costs. And a lot of these are operational costs, so you're bonding for operational costs. So what, say, for example, on a $50 million bond issue, what would these fees typically run?
Let me think about that for a minute. I would say for your cost of issuance, it will be under, and Kristen, please jump in if you have thoughts, but under $100,000 for these costs on the cost of issuance side. On the underwriter's discount side, that can vary widely. That could be $5 per bond, which is $5 per thousand, to we've seen $20 plus. And it depends on even the ones that have the $20 plus, they could still come in with the lowest rate. And that's what you care about at the end of the day. If they're gonna bring the lowest rate, then we'll pay what they are demanding, but because it's gonna save you money in the long run.
For the most part, also, most issuers will roll the cost of issuance, the 5 that are included in the upper left-hand column of cost of issuance into the bond issue. There are a few clients of ours that will pay for those out of operation expenses prior to, we always build in an estimate for the cost of issuance. I think I just issued bonds on Tuesday for county. It was about $10 million. I think the fee was maybe like $84,000 total cost of issuance.
This is Commissioner Freeze. Quick question, just help me wrap my head around this. When you refinance a house, right, usually you have to go get a new appraisal and you have to do a certain... All in my head, the way I'm thinking of this is all of those costs usually get wrapped right back into the mortgage. And, you save money in the end, even though you paid a little up front, because it's closing costs. I kind of, in my head, I'm thinking of this as closing costs. Is that a reasonable way to think about this?
That's exactly right. Yep. And then when you refinance bonds, you go through all these costs as well, plus a few more, like a verification agent, perhaps escrow agent. Right, slide 17, I'll jump into, I kind of mentioned earlier, types of bond sales. You have your competitive sales and then your negotiated sales. So competitive sales, you essentially select a date that you want to sell your bonds. You select a date and a time. Say, have your bids in by 10 o'clock on August 3rd, and you send it, you produce your disclosure statement. It's called a preliminary official statement. You send that out to the investor world and the underwriter world, and you get them all set up on your online platforms and everything, and then you request those bids, and then you see bids come in, if it's at 10 o'clock, about 9:58. They'll start coming in up to the very last second because it's totally market dependent. What is the market doing that hour, that kind of minute, what's going on? And they're also on a competitive deal. The potential bidders are out trying to sell those bonds to investors before they've even bid on them. So they're getting those people all lined up ahead of time. And then you have negotiated, as I mentioned, you will go through an underwriter selection, and they will be working with you essentially from the get-go on those bonds. They will help you put together the offering document, and then they will be working behind the scenes as well on getting the bond issue out there into their investor contacts. And then you set up a day to price those bonds, and then it's a platform where you can actually see the individual investors come in for how much and when, and so you're out in the market for a couple hours usually on the day of pricing, and you watch those come in, and that's how a negotiated deal kind of high level works.
Matt, can I just sort of interrupt, just to interject back on the competitive sales. One point I wanted to emphasize based on conversations that we've had, and you spoke to this in terms of that market dynamic, right? People are, what's going on in the world, what's going on in the markets, and that's affecting, the result of your bond offering essentially. And so I know when we've talked, part of what PFM is looking at is just to that point, what's going on in the market? Is the Federal Reserve about to announce something about rates? Is there something else? Is there a presidential election coming up? You know, there are all these components, as everyone knows, in terms of stock market fluctuation, that can impact on us on a bond offering as well. And so that's something to keep in mind. Well, I'll maybe, when we close, I'll talk about kind of when you'll hear from us again on this topic, but one thing to think about is kind of the authorization that you as the commission are providing us as staff. One way to do that is to say, as long as we're within these parameters, you can go ahead, and what that allows is that market timing. So that concept will come back up. I just want to kind of plant the seed now.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Parameter resolution is those are not uncommon to give the issuer the ability to be flexible and nimble with the changing market. Also highlight on here, kind of the second main bullet point here, we have the option to privately place your bonds, and that would be typically with a bank. And so it could be a local or regional bank or sometimes a large bank, that an investment bank that also has kind of a commercial banking side as well. The advantages to those can be, those can work, you can go through that process much more quickly. And you typically do not need an offering document or a rating. So you can save on costs up front. However, there generally is a cost to doing that. And so you typically are going to see higher interest rates with privately placed debt over just going into the public market.
I'm going to add, you know, there are some clients that I have that do want to place their debt locally. It's important for them to work with their local banks. And so we've done analysis and talked to the local banks and compared what the costs of are privately placing it versus doing a competitive sale. So these are some of the analysis we can do on your behalf.
Yep, and also with privately placed bonds, they don't always go out. You know, kind of the term is typically shorter than 20 years. And so I will say recently, the longest I've seen is probably that 20-year mark. But that is one other option out there. And then we just have this little graphic here on transaction management. You know, we start by, you know, with you all being a new client, not only a new client to PFM, but a new potential issuer in the public debt markets. We're doing a lot of work to even get to the point that we have here. Right now, we're currently working on our own cash flow modeling to look at specifically some financial metrics, notably debt service coverage. That's revenues over your annual revenues over annual debt service, and then also your liquidity is basically how much cash do you have. And so I'll just kind of go through here. You know, then we start getting setting up a financing schedule, looking at different debt structure alternatives. You know, do we want to go short term, long term? Where do we want to have a call date? Do we want to do interest only for a little while and then bring in principal and start amortizing principal out later? And that all, the cash flow modeling helps kind of determine that.
This is Commissioner Freed. So I have a question. So we have an audit every year, right? And our audits have always come in, I don't know, 4 stars or 5 stars. They're always very good, right? But my question is to what you were just talking about, the stuff that you're doing up front here. Is the audit that we do annually, do we have to provide different data now that we are potentially asking someone else other than the state to loan us money? In other words, are they gonna ask for a different set of documents, a different auditing procedure? Is that gonna be a fallout, or are these separate petals?
No, that's a very fair question. There will be requirements by issuing public debt. Kristen kind of noted there's ongoing or continuing disclosure that you'll need to do, and the audit is one of those, but you do not have to do anything different with your audit. That's going to contain everything that investors will need.
So I got a question. You've talked about how you could issue debt to a bank at a higher interest rate, probably in a shorter term. So if you're doing that, is there a benefit to going to a bond to a bank than just going to a loan for a bank? We talked about that before we hired you, engaged you, and, you know, particularly short-term loan, you know, if you're looking like a construction loan for 2-3 years, and then you're gonna do the, you know, get the clean water fund, can you analyze that kind of thing?
Well, I will say that they're essentially one and the same. It's just a bond because of who you are, your public entity, that it is a bond, and that's kind of legally what you have to do to incur debt.
But you would analyze situations if, like Ezra was talking about, that transition period, almost like a construction loan, maybe a little longer, and going to a bank for that rather than going out to a full bond market to do it. It may cost us more, but there may be less expense, may offset it.
Absolutely. And in today's market, we're you know, I don't want to say we're in the high interest rate market. We are in a higher interest rate market than we have been for the past 10+ years, really. And so maybe we don't want to lock in long-term rates right now. However, with that, right now, the yield curve is actually inverted, meaning that short-term rates are higher than longer-term rates. So that's something to consider as well. So I'll quickly kind of finish going through this, but you know, we're going to develop the terms for the financing, help put together the documents that are needed. We help with the rating presentation and which rating agency to go to, and then the actual sale of the bonds, closing, and then any kind of, you know, we can help with continued disclosure, posting that and helping to put that together. But that's kind of the high-level transaction management that we help with.
One last question, maybe from me. Do you typically see us doing like one big bond issue a year to try to cover everything, or do you recommend doing, you know, we do a lot of projects. Do you recommend trying to break the projects out into different bond issues, or trying to do all one big one?
Yeah. That's a really good question. And it depends on a few different things. One is the market, current market. If interest rates are higher, maybe you don't want to bond and lock yourself in for all of these upcoming projects. Two is your expected draw schedule. I say expected because I've learned that it never goes according to plan, but when will you need those funds? And if you issue for all the upcoming projects kind of at one time, you're going to be paying interest on that debt from day one, and you may not even be needing those funds for another year or 2 years. And so that there's kind of a cost-benefit analysis that we will run to look at what's the break even, what do rates have to do between now and when you actually need these funds. And you know, you can take those funds and you can invest them, but only up, you know, Kristen touched on arbitrage rebate before, only up to a certain rate. That's the rate on the bonds themselves. And so, and only in markets where interest rates go that high too. So there's a lot of considerations when we're looking at that. But we take that all those things into account. Just quickly, slide 19. I think I've gone over most of this. We have we broke it into pre-sale, day of sale, and then post-sale, where we're looking at the bond structure. We put together the preliminary official statement. We get in touch with the rating agencies. There's typically a call with the rating agencies. They'll have many questions ahead of time that we will answer along with the district. And then the day of sale, we take for a competitive issue. We take the bids, we verify those bids, make sure that they are accurate, and then award the bids themselves. And then post sale, you know, we can help with any documents that need to be finalized for closing, which usually occurs about 2 weeks after the sale of the bonds. And I will turn it back over to Kristen to finish up here.
So we've mentioned a couple times bond ratings. So typically the debt will be rated by one of the major rating agencies mentioned before. There's Moody's Investor Service, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch. They rate both GO and revenue bond credits. And it's basically looking at your credit worthiness, the ability to pay back your bonds. And so in this market, a lot of the investors do their own credit research, but the rating also plays a role in kind of how marketable your debt is in the public market. And so you can see the three rating agencies, and they have their own rating scales, and they have their own methodologies and criteria, but you can see that a AAA is the highest rating you can get with Moody's, S&P, and Fitch, and then you can see the various investment grade rating scales on the bottom of page 21. If you get below that Baa3, BBB minus, and that's no longer considered investment grade, we do have credit calculators that we have internally, so we can take a look at like what your metrics are. This is part of the exercise that we're going through in terms of looking at kind of your cash flows and your fund balances and policies and things like that are things the rating agencies look at to determine where we think kind of that rating will be and what rating agency to use.
That is the end of the main presentation. We do have an appendix with, you know, we won't necessarily go through it unless folks have questions on it, but just kind of some historical rates, and then why you would go competitive or negotiated for public bond sale, and just kind of credit spreads, the difference, what a rating is essentially worth.
Okay, anybody else? Ezra? Quick question on ratings. I noticed it was light blue in the chart from a while back that said what's every time you go out for an issue and what's less often than that. But I just thought I'd ask real explicitly, is it something you have to do every time you issue, or is it something that your rating from last year lasts for X amount of time into the future?
Yep. No. So each time you want to get a credit rating, they will rate your existing bonds, and then the new issuance as well. So they comment in their reports. They'll comment on both. Now, you all don't have any rated bonds right now, and so they would just be looking the first time out. They would just be looking at the one bond issuance, but they would be taking into consideration all the SRF debt that you have as well.
Commissioner Eskridge has her hand raised.
Who's Sarah?
Thank you. Two questions. One, you were kind of starting to get at this at the end, I think, around timing considerations. I'm just interested to know more, perhaps not now, but as we think about this moving forward, and I'm sure you're working with staff on it, about how we think about dealing with the fact that we're used to a clean water fund loan, which is a reimbursable loan. And then I think I'm understanding correctly that bonding is, you know, in advance. And so how do we decide which financing mechanisms are going to make sense when we don't know when we start projects if it's going to be reimbursed by the Clean Water Fund? And perhaps this is a broader point, but I mean, that's something that as we think about our communications and conversations with the state, not having that understanding or appreciation of what we can expect to be funded for, and then how we balance that with our need to bond is a real challenge that I hope, if it needs to be part of our lobbying and advocacy strategy, it is part of the asks and questions in that work as well. So maybe a bit of a statement, but if I'm reflecting any of that incorrectly, in terms of timing, please correct me, and any thoughts on those considerations for us at this time. Otherwise, feel free to just bring that in the future.
Sure. I think what you said makes perfect sense, and it is kind of a push-pull of if you are going to get funding from the Clean Water Fund. You know, many districts go through the same thing. Is there going to be SRF funds available for us? If not, then we need to think about what else we need to do to get funds, whether it's cash, and then we get reimbursed through a bond. You can do that as well. And so you can pay cash up front as long as there has been the proper resolution set up for that. You can get reimbursed through bonding. And you obviously also need to have the cash on hand to be able to do that. But yeah, I think you know, there are a lot of considerations when looking at the different financing options and then the timing of those. And you are correct in that with public bonding or public market bonding, you do get the cash up front at closing. So it is dependent on what are your needs, what are your funding needs, what's your cash flow look like, and what are kind of your options and for funding, and how much funding will you get from those options.
This is Bill Walker. I want to chime in here a little bit, both to validate your point, Commissioner Eskridge, and hopefully to provide a little assurance. I made this point in an earlier meeting, and Eric Dundee made it today as well. We've heard today kind of the three major factors that affect these financing decisions, the sort of cost aspects of timing for bonding, the restrictions on Clean Water Fund projects, particularly BABA, and also the need to align our project schedules with the timing of when money comes in the door. We have a team that meets fairly regularly every few months to look at our projects and consider these factors for each one of them, and also working with PFM to try to put together the best schedule we can. I think, unfortunately, the bottom line of this discussion is we're in a new environment of uncertainty, and having to keep our eye on things and make adjustments as we go is kind of the best we can do at this point. One of the benefits of Clean Water Fund that we never consciously thought of is a much easier program to use than bonding is.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, bigger picture context, Bill. And just as a maybe piece of feedback, in terms of the conversations I've had recently with some of the other commissioners and owner communities, I think this is something that our owner communities are interested in understanding as well, because there's sometimes confusion around how our projects are financed, how capital is allocated, this balance between cash financing that we've moved to more recently, and then this entirely new conversation about bonding. So I'm sure this is part of the conversation that will probably come up in the August meeting, but with our owner communities. But I think if not, it is something that, at least as far as I've heard, they are interested in better understanding. And obviously it's going to be an ongoing conversation for us as well. So thanks for including that. My second question or point was much more broad, and just way back to the beginning, really, I'm trying to understand the big picture landscape. Like, what's the high level takeaway of some of this? And what I heard you say is that this oversubscription to these programs is becoming more and more common because the federal money is working, right? Projects are actually happening now to a degree that they haven't happened in maybe 50 some years. And I just wondered if it's safe to also make the point that that's additionally because we just haven't done as much infrastructure replacement investment since perhaps the 60s. And so we're also at this age of aging infrastructure. And so we've got this influx of federal funds. We've got a backlog of projects that need to be done. And so am I correct in saying we are not, in hearing you say we are not unique in the fact that in Wisconsin, we are oversubscribing to these programs because of that very macro landscape that we're dealing with?
Yeah, I would say that is very accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Bro?
Just in keeping with the 101 nature of this, for me, I'm learning a ton. Everything we would do would be tax exempt, is that right? Whether GO or revenue bonds, or is that not necessarily the case? Are there a set of choices there between tax exempt and non-tax exempt bonds?
That'll be something it's dependent on the project itself. I would expect everything to be tax exempt.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh, Ben's got something.
Yep, sorry, just wanted to just briefly mention, this will not be the last time that you hear about bonding. So we'll be bringing more to you as part of the budget discussions, bond council discussions, and bonding authorization. So just more to come.
Okay, thank you. Now we've got Todd who's going to give us a capital improvement planning overview. Don't want to squeeze him on time.
Morning, Todd Giebert, Capital Planning Manager. Joined by Lisa Coleman, Director of Engineering, to provide a preview of the 2025 CIP. Since we didn't do a draft document this year, I'll just give a little quick update on where we're at. On the expenditure side and the project list, I'd say we're about 95% done with our budget. The financing plan is a little bit behind, as you might imagine, and Ben will be producing a presentation for that at the next meeting. So this is just focused on the spending, if you will. What we wanted to cover today. Is it the arrow?
User arrow.
Thank you. This provides a comparison of the spending in the proposed plan to last year's plan, 2024. Take a little bit of a deep dive into the 2025 capital budget, explain some of the reasons for the projects and the general cost drivers, and then Lisa will provide a summary of some of the major projects in the plan. So to start off with, this is comparing the 2025 proposed CIP with the current plan 2024. Cut off at the bottom, but the goal of our work is really to make sure that spending doesn't increase in the 6 years of these plans, and you can't really see that, but in the proposed plan it's about $272 million, and the 2024 CIP is $275 million. So there's not a lot of changes between the two plans. The main change is how the projects are divvied between the different cost centers in the plan. So you can see that in the blue category, projects at the plant have increased from about 57% to 64% in the proposed plan. And this is mainly because we have 3 large projects that we're focusing on in the 2025 CIP. And you've heard about these before. These are liquid processing improvements, phase 2, the heat and power project, and biosolids study. So this slide provides a highlight of just the major changes between the two plans again. Now, spending is just in the 6-year window of those respective plans, so they don't necessarily reflect total project costs. The first 3 projects are new to the 2025 CIP, and they're relatively modest in size. These would all be projects in the collection system. If you recall at our May 30th presentation on the collection system facility plan, we talked about difficulty in accessing some of our system, our collection system. Up to 20% is inaccessible right now. So this project would aim to improve that access. At this point, this is more of a placeholder. We don't have a firm plan for how to do that. So this is, in the outlying years of that plan. A more immediate project is pumping station bar screens. This project would put bar screens ahead of the pumps at the 4 stations that pump to the plant. The reason for doing this is some of the heavier debris that's making its way right now to headworks is really tough on our fine screening equipment. So the hope here is that by removing some of that heavier debris, we can prolong the life of those screens. And then the third project there is a project to put isolation valves on a shared force main that right now we really have difficulty maintaining. The next project, these are installing generators at all of our district pumping stations. We have generators at some of them now, but not all of them. That decrease that you're seeing is not because we're giving up the project, but we are postponing it due to more, what we consider more immediate concerns. So that's why the decrease there of about $8 million between the two plans. And then the projects obviously highlighted in bold are the ones that are most important. A little background, one thing that we did differently this year, or really stressed, I guess, is meeting to discuss what are our three main priorities. Involved meetings, frequent meetings with Eric, Lisa, and Alan, and myself, to really identify what do we need to get accomplished in the next couple of years, and these three projects kept rising to the top. So Lisa's going to talk about the first two there, liquid processing and heat and power, but just to talk about some of the cost changes. Liquid processing, part of that increase is because we added a sub-project to the overall project to rehabilitate some of our primary tanks. It makes sense from the standpoint that these tanks really need the work, and they're immediately adjacent to the project area. The other thing I'll say about that is the 2025 cost of $65 million. We just got some information from our consultant earlier this week that indicates that cost should go down, but we're not prepared yet. We're still going through the memo, and we don't really know how much that will be. As far as heat and power, that decrease in cost is because in the 2024 plan, we had not only facility planning costs, but also costs to actually build infrastructure as part of that project. We're putting that on hold right now, realizing we can't get to all this work in the next 6 years. So we're not giving up by any means on the project. We're just not showing those costs in the plan at this time. Part of that reason is because the biosolids processing improvements have taken on greater importance. The 2024 plan included money basically to make sure that we can meet our 180-day storage requirement by being able to remove material from the plant more efficiently. We're kind of taking a step back a little bit and doing some facility planning and looking at more options, possibly making a Class A cake or liquid, Class A liquid that would result in volume reduction. So that's the reason for the increased cost and kind of the shift in focus, if you will.
This is Bill Walker. I'm going to put a little context in here for commissioners. You've heard about biosolids for longer than I've been here, at least 10 years. And the conversation has shifted, which is reflected in Todd's comments. Years ago, the issue was more, how do we ensure that we have a product that is meeting the requirements of the landowners that we're working with? Pressures on storage have become more apparent to us, and so the focus is shifting, as Todd said, more to that, more fundamental. Are we able to get rid of the material that we need to and make that easier? It's a different issue, clearly a more expensive issue, and I think that's important to be aware of, that the tone is changing on that topic.
I would just add to that, a secondary concern, another concern is just emerging contaminants like PFAS that this evening we did our 2021 biosolid study of more prominent in the industry, and we really want to make sure we have a sustainable plan going forward. Threw this slide in here to show how long these projects have been around. Actually, they date as far back as I could find the 2014 CIP. They've been renamed a little bit. Plant Energy is heat and power. Aeration system projects have been bundled into the liquid processing improvements, and those are fairly far along in design. And then Metro Mix is biosolids. There's been work start and stops in the heat and power and biosolids over the years, and things that didn't work out quite like we hoped. But I guess the underlying message is, again, that we want to keep going with the facility planning. These projects need to go concurrently because they inform each other, and they really will determine the handling of biogas, biosolids, and how we use energy here for the foreseeable future. So this is showing, again, our 6-year expenditures at the far right, $272 million that I referenced in proposed spending. Over the years, we've tried to balance it out as best we can, not only from a financial perspective, but also from a staffing perspective. The one out, so it roughly averages out to about $45 million a year is our target. One exception is in 2027, when liquid processing is expected to be in full swing with construction, so it's a little higher in that year. The other thing to note on this slide is the 2024 spending, we're on track to spend about $26 million, which is still short of our budget, but it's higher than any amount in recent history. And the reason for that is because we've awarded a lot of projects in the recent, well, the recent year. We've awarded 6 projects that have come before the commission, but even within the past month or 2 months, 4 projects. So you've seen these individually. We showed you budget to actuals, but I thought I'd just show it, them in summary to tell you where we're at, give you an idea. So of the 6 projects that we have awarded recently, in the 2024 CIP, the total project costs were $56.2 million. And after considering the contractor bids and firming up the estimates in the 2025 CIP, those total project costs are $54.5 million. So we think we're on track with our financing plan from last year's plan. Good shape to finance all this. I guess the other point that I would touch on here is you see the 2 projects at the bottom. I think Commissioner Meyer may have mentioned these last time. What is the effect of BABA that might have on the projects? Those are the only 2 projects we bid with BABA requirements recently, and they were both slightly higher over the budget. So while it's way too early, too small of a sample size to say what the real effect is, it is something that's we're definitely tracking.
This is Commissioner Freeze. Could you go back one slide, please?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Bill. So I want to be clear, just so I'm looking, because I can't see the stuff along the bottom of the screen. The last 2024, the year we're in, is the last column with a blue line, correct? And is the blue line what you expect to, I'm going to use the word encumber even, in other words, award a contract for by the end of this year?
Yeah, it's estimated spending for this year.
Okay. So then, just to circle this back to the presentation we just got done with, this becomes really important, right? In terms of what we bond and when we bond, right? Because even though you guys have done more work than you ever have, or virtually ever have, we're still, 20 million below what you were hoping to do, if I'm reading this graph correctly? Okay, so that's more of a comment just for as we go forward with this bonding thing, and when we issue bonds, we have the same issue at the city, right? We go through this exercise where they come to us in the middle of the year and they say, we're going to do a bond issuing. You need to tell me now if you're really going to get this done or you're really not going to get this done. So, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's the timing thing that Matt and his team was talking about. It's maybe more applicable to geo bonding than it is to Clean Water Fund, since that's a reversible program. Yes, exactly.
Commissioner Eskridge has her hand raised.
Sarah, go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks for bringing us back to this slide, Greg, because I had a question on it as well. And maybe it's just more of a comment, but again, in the conversations that I've had recently with owner communities, I think this gap in, like, I don't want to diminish, right? Well done, Lisa. Like, the team is executing more than they've ever done, which is fabulous. And yet we're still overestimating what we can get done. And so the impact on that, on what we're collecting in terms of service charges and rates to our owner communities, I think is something that's of concern. So as we think about our budget moving forward, I think this is something that I want us to really push ourselves on and make sure that we're not continuing to overestimate the amount of work that we can get done, because I think that's a real concern in terms of our relationships with and frankly, trust and validity of our work with our owner communities. So just something to consider moving forward.
Ken? Commissioner Clark, the overall effect of the debt on our annual budget increases, that would be helpful to see that. I think our member communities are very concerned about the 9% increase on an annual basis. And the last time we discussed this, or when we discussed it in the past, unless I'm wrong, the debt was about 6% of that 9 annual basis. And in the neighborhood. So our member communities have definitely expressed their concerns about the 9% increase on an annual basis. And to me, what we decide to do, the capital projects we decide to take on directly affect that. So just asking everyone to take that into consideration also.
So I got a question. What this graph brings up that, you know, we've got some years much larger proposed expenditures than we do the capacity to meet the expenditure. So has there ever been thought when you're doing the capital improvement plan, which is where I think your budget expenditures come from, and go into the budget, and then match the budget, have you ever tried to better match these things? Or is it because money going out for one project might be so much in one year than a different year? Is that because of delays in, the construction, or what's causing that difference in the?
This is Bill Walker. It's time to chime in here. What points do I want to make here? You're all making excellent points. We agree with them. We have been considering them in construction of the upcoming capital improvements plan. To highlight some of those points, we have put, and this was already mentioned, a lot of effort this year into looking at our project schedule and aligning it to what is feasible, both in terms of our own staff capacity, the availability of the market to meet our needs, particularly on things that are supply constrained, like electrical equipment, the dependencies among the various projects, which things need to go first, which projects are in the way of one another. And we feel that we will be bringing you a plan, a CIP that is more actively right-sized against the various factors that we're facing. The other couple things I want to highlight, we're talking here in terms of underspending for a couple-year period, and there were a few things that were unique to that period or that we are adjusting to. I've mentioned one already, the switch in the speed of supply chain. It was a very dramatic slowdown in certain things that we are adjusting to. I will recall that there was a double transition in the leadership of the engineering department. Not an engineer, but I have watched Lisa very aggressively get us back on schedule. See that reflected. The other thing I want to mention is we are looking here at a slide of project spending. The underlying concern that communities and commissioners and we have is the risk of over-collecting revenue to meet that project, and we have two options available to us. One is to adjust the project schedule so that it is more accurate. The other is to adjust the way we handle our reserves. And that is one of the issues we're talking with PFM about and looking at in our model. We can still program in a high rate of spending, but perhaps collect less in reserves, recognizing the risk likelihood that some projects will be slower than others. I just want to highlight again that these are all things we're very aware of. We're working harder this year to incorporate those, and you're going to hear more about them when we come back.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Go ahead.
And I might need to assist here. Doesn't want to go forward again. Thank you. Oh, next, that's fine. We already talked enough about the loans. That's the only other thing I had to say about that other last slide. So that's actually, the recent discussion is a good segue into this slide. So this is showing the 2025 proposed capital budget. Only that year is authorized actually for spending in the budget. And this is attempting to show the total budget of $44 million, how it's broken down basically between design and construction expenses and also by project status. So on the bottom, construction contracts that I just mentioned, we have 8 that actually have signed contracts and 1 large equipment purchase in 2025. And those are spending, assuming everything, like Bill said, supply chains don't get disrupted, accounts for $25 million or over half that spending. So it's well on track. The other status category there, design in progress, people are already working on those projects right now. So next year, we think that $5 million in design expenses will occur. And then of those designs, $12 million more will go to construction. So the third category, projects not started, is relatively small. So again, this is all subject to things slowing down, but overall, we feel like this is right-sized. As far as reasons why we're doing these projects, in the 2024 CIP, we listed these 4 broad categories of project drivers, realizing that projects obviously have multiple drivers, but there's always one primary one. So as a broad overview, about 2/3 of our projects are being done for condition needs, and the remaining third really to address capacity. And the resilience category there at the far end is actually dropped off in the 2025 CIP with that delay in the generator project that I talked about. So something that eventually we'd like to get more balanced, but right now we're addressing the most immediate need. And just a final word about costs. Obviously, inflation has come down over the last year. We include inflation allowances for all our projects. So with a drop from roughly 5% last year at this time to just over 3%, we made corresponding changes in our projections. We dropped the interest rate for next year, most importantly, from 5% to 3.5%. At the same time, we're also adding in cost contingencies. We've already kind of discussed here the effects of Build America, Buy America, and its effect it might have on clean water funded projects. So these are tentative projects that we think might be eligible for clean water fund funding, and made allowances. Those cost increases are real. With that, I will turn it over to Lisa, and she's going to talk about 4 projects in particular.
Thank you, Todd. Todd asked me to talk about some of the ongoing projects that are going to continue into 2025, so I'll try to be brief. Most of you are familiar with most of these projects since they're kind of ongoing. Let's see. First is liquid processing phase 2, which, as Todd noted, is a big part of our spending plan. You might recall that this system involves the aging equipment located in the center of the plant there with kind of the red squiggly line around it. That's where biological nutrient removal, or BNR, takes place by basically supplying air to the bugs working in those tanks. So the blowers and all the aeration equipment, tankage, that kind of stuff. So there's several sub-projects in this one under this heading, which I won't go into a lot of detail here except to note some differences from last year. So we've taken the partial plant pilot out of the 6-year spending model, as we don't think a partial plant is necessary anymore, and we're confident we can just go to full scale right away, which helps us keep the schedule moving on the project. And I think Todd alluded to the fact that we've added in the east primary tank rehab. So this project is replacing the collector mechanisms in the east primary tanks. That's the mechanisms that pull material off the bottom of the tanks and scum off the top. So that's necessary work that makes sense to include with the project, because we'll have to coordinate with other shutdowns that are going to be needed as part of the project anyway. So as far as status on this project, we're reaching the end of preliminary design. We've made some important equipment selections, which I think I've shared with you a few meetings ago. We're nearing a decision on the BNR process. So that's basically if we're going to stay with the current process but try to go a little more efficiently, or if we're going to move to a hybrid plant that has more operational flexibility to run at lower or higher DO, which would have a higher capital cost, but may have some modest energy savings over time. So we expect to make that decision in the next month, and then we'll move into final design this fall, hopefully with construction anticipated then in 2026. And as Todd noted earlier, we think the costs shown here are likely to go down some, but we're not prepared to tell you how much yet. All right, next, could you move to the next slide, Amanda? Heat and power improvements. So we've talked a lot about this project. Anna came and told you about it when we hired the consultant to work on the facility plan. So we're now engaged in that facility planning work. This project involves a lot of interconnected infrastructure at the plant. So that slide on the right, you can see there's lots of lines and boxes and things on there. It's really the systems involving biocas and power generation at the plant, and then also the heating systems at the plant. Those two areas are highly interconnected, so that's why we need to look at them at the same time, which is kind of what that, whoops, we lost our slide there. Well, I'll keep talking while we see if we can sort this out. But that's why we need to look at those things with those parallel, kind of in parallel as part of the project. Oh, thank you. All right, so we need to go through the facility planning effort to better inform infrastructure replacement related to these systems in the coming years, and how does it interface with some of the other projects too. And we hope to have this facility plan completed in fall of 2025. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. All right. Now I wanted to talk about a few of the projects that are out in the collection system related to ongoing capacity improvements to serve Lower Badger Mill Creek Basin. You might recall we've been working on planning and building the Lower Badger Mill Creek Interceptor since the early 2000s. That's the pipe you see on the left in various colors there. We last talked about kind of the missing link, which is the yellow part in the middle there between PD and Midtown Road. About half of that yellow pipe is now completed. So the piece between PD and Shady Oak Lane through Viridian's Arden Glen development is now complete. Well, nearly complete. They're still working on a few punch list items, but that pipe is in the ground now. We accepted bids on that about a year ago, and as I mentioned, we're wrapping up on punch list items there. The last piece of the Interceptor is phase 6. That's between the two blue arrows. That's between basically Shady Oak and up to Midtown Road. We're hoping that will be, we're working on design of that right now. We're hoping to construct that next year. And then once that happens, the red dot that the top arrow is pointing to, which is the Midtown lift station, which is a temporary lift station, that can be taken out of service. So, and as you might recall, this one is going to be a challenging one construction-wise because we're going to be going through a very narrow ravine through private property. All right, next slide, please. All right, this is my last slide. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the ongoing Pumping Station 17 projects. So once we get all that additional flow from the Lower Badger Mill Creek Interceptor that I was just talking about, the Pumping Station 17, then we need to have adequate capacity to pump at Pumping Station 17 and get the flow away from Pumping Station 17. So the first of the projects is the actual capacity improvement at the station. So that was awarded earlier this year in January, and the scope is to upgrade the capacity at the station and rehab some other systems at that existing station. We expect to break ground on the station later this summer. The first item of work will be a large utility vault outside the station in that grassy area that you can see on the slide to the left outside the station. However, this project is definitely one of those where we're seeing some the supply chain issues really with the equipment are really driving the schedule. So those lead times for equipment are still extremely long. So that's having a big impact on the construction schedule for the project. That said, we expect that the construction will be done hopefully in early 2026 on the station. And then the last of the projects related to Pumping Station 17 is the ongoing construction of the second phase of the relief force main that is going to help us carry additional flow away from the pumping station. So that's the map you see on the left. The two red lines are basically the original force main, and then the relief force main, basically the second force main from the pumping station. We started that work several years ago, and the first phase was completed a few years ago, and then now we're working on building the second piece of that relief force main. So that project was awarded in August of 2023, and construction there is ongoing over the past winter and spring. The pipe is now, for that part of the project, is over halfway complete. Also, City of Verona's bike path and bridge that was built in conjunction with the project is all done. Pipe installation is now paused for the summer to avoid some wetland impacts there. So the last run of pipe is between the arrows on the slide. That will be that's basically south of Verona's Veterans Park and west of Old Highway PB. So that will be built starting up again in October and is expected to be done in late May of 25. So, and you'll hear a little bit more in a few minutes here about an emergency repair that's happening in conjunction, somewhat related to this project. that, I will turn it back to Todd.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Just to wrap up, just wanted to mention that we have delayed some projects that were previously in the CIP in order to make the plan more manageable, both financially and from a staffing perspective. So I won't go through each of these line by line, just to say that most of it involves moving project starts back, 2 to 3 years in most cases. And we think we're able to mitigate any risk fairly effectively, so there's relatively low risk to doing this. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions the Commission may have.
Okay, anybody have any questions? No? Okay, thank you very much. That will take us to the Executive Director's report. Bill?
Yes, and I'm sorry to keep you longer, but we do have a few timely things, and I'm going to first turn it over to Amanda Wegner to talk about Badger Milk Creek stakeholder and one other thing.
Good morning, Commissioners. Amanda Wegner, Communications and Public Affairs Director here at the district. So I'm going to give you a quick update on the Badger Milk Creek Stakeholder Group. We had our penultimate meeting last week, second to last. And at that meeting last week, the group went through their individual projects in their portfolio. There are 4 of them. And the presenters, the intended presenters of each project, just walked through the group through, and they did a straw poll of each one. Basically a loose thumbs up, thumbs down, just to kind of gauge where the group was. And that was a good activity. And they will be going next month. They will vote on the portfolio of projects as a whole, which they will then bring here to the Commission on September 12th. That is an in-person meeting. The stakeholder group members have been invited to be here in person, with the presenters asked to be here in person to present those to you. Now, when you get that package, or when you get that presentation on the 12th of September, you're basically going to get a report. You will have kind of a something that looks very similar to our CIP business cases for each individual project, so outlining potential costs. Some of the projects, cost is a little loose still. Additional information is needed, but in some of them involve construction. So there's a design and a construction phase. So who kind of the project leaders would be, a description. So some of the same information that you already are accustomed to receiving when we do projects. You will also receive, as part of that report, some background information, recap information on the great work that the group has been doing over the last 10 months or so, and look forward to the Commission approving that portfolio of projects. I guess I want to just add 2 things here as well. Just I am the project manager for the stakeholder group, so I've been in every meeting, and it has been really great to see this group come together over the last 10 months, working on those projects and really coming into a place and space of collaboration. So I think this is an effort that has been well worth it. And to that point, there is interest among the stakeholder group participants to continue with the group in some form or fashion. So that's something that I'm working on right now in terms of what does that look like in the future in terms of logistics. There's value in sort of accountability among the partners to keep those projects going. Some more details to come on what the future of the group would look like, but we look forward to welcoming them here in a couple meetings. Well, I thought you were going to give your Badger Milk Creek update first. Yes, I will do that. Also, Commissioner Eskridge had mentioned it, but we do have our scheduling, and the email will go out today, an in-person owner community meeting on August 13th. I did put it out to the owner communities, what time worked best for them. It will be a lunch meeting. It will be a hybrid option. Still working out the logistics, but worked closely with Forbes McIntosh, with DCCVA, and a couple other key stakeholders in terms of working up that meeting. So You will get the invitation via email later today.
Can I just ask quick, what's the agenda focus for that owner communities engagement, this next one in August?
So in part, some of the same information that you heard here from Todd today, but curated to the owner communities. And then the other piece of the thank you, will be what you hear at the August 8th meeting from, I believe, Bill, Todd, and Ben as well.
I don't know if this would be the right time for it, but I couldn't help thinking today that the bonding 101, someone even kind of said it, I think, that in terms of future agendas for our owner communities, that topic seems like it'd be a really good one to cover. I don't know if we'll do it in August or if we'll do it down the road, but.
Yeah, we are doing a 90-minute meeting on the 13th, and the content we have already is going to be pushing it a bit, so we can definitely keep that for a future meeting agenda with them. But thank you.
All righty, some more updates. Marty Griffin is not here, but I am pinch hitting for him to give you an update on Badger Mill Creek permit issues. A little context for those who are listening. Our approach to meeting stricter phosphorus requirements in Badger Mill Creek is to remove the Badger Mill Creek discharge point and consolidate into a single outfall in Badfish Creek. This is obviously fundamentally a permit issue, but the Department of Natural Resources needs to amend the area-wide water quality plan to reflect the removal of that discharge. That plan is part of a continuing water quality management process that the DNR runs. And among other things, that plan identifies all of the point sources in an area. The process and the legal standards for amending the water quality plan are in state statute and administrative rule. And it includes a stop with the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission because DNR has contracted with CARPC for that process. On June 10th, we submitted our request to amend the water quality plan. That started a 90-day clock for DNR to approve or deny the request. June 20th, CARPC asked us for additional information, which we provided on June 28th. On July 11th, CARPC held their public hearing. Marty Griffin was there to present in person and to show that the request meets the standards in law and won't harm water quality. On September 8th, the 90-day clock will expire, and that gives us ample time to submit our discharge permit application before permit expires in March of 2025. So that is the status there. The next item is the key.
Before you
Sure.
leave that, Murphy, status of the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission's decision on or request?
I missed that step. They are going to have a meeting on August 8th to make their final decision. In your packet today is what we are calling a key initiatives report. So as you'll recall, for the last few years, we've given a quarterly report that we used to call focus items, and that report was done in conjunction with the quarterly performance reviews of the executive director. You formally acted on that report. It was an item on consent with a resolution. In this interim leadership period, we look for an opportunity to revise that approach. We here as the executive office and directors, especially Amanda Wegner and myself. So a month ago, I had a conversation with President Hovell and Commissioner Meyer, who gave some advice. First, make sure that that report is covering the most important current work of the district. Second, identify any items that were focus items that are on hold for now. And third, remove the link to performance review and formal acceptance of the report. We've done all those things. That's why this is an ED update instead of a consent item. You'll see that we also reorganized the report. We used to have green, red, yellow status indicators. We have instead grouped the items by status, which to us seems easier to read. The top group on that report, things that are currently occupying additional leadership or staff time and attention. The next group we call monitoring, things that are sort of proceeding fine at the staff level. There's a group of items that are paused for now. There are 3 items in there. An item called Commission Process Improvement, an Equity Community of Practice, and a potential change to our Industrial and Service Charge Program. The last category is something that we called Wrapping Up, which only has 1 item, and that is the greenhouse gas plan. That has taken a back seat internally, but it is slated for final review by the Executive Office, and then would come to the Commission. The other thing that may not be apparent is the previous report kind of rigidly tied to a single year time period. We've adjusted it to be a little bit looser to talk about, again, to convey sort of what's ongoing and important right now. We're reporting on recent progress and next steps for each item, and things will come on and off that report as they become relevant or fall off. So again, what we're trying to do here is just keep awareness of what's going on in the district during this interim period. I'm sure the next executive director and you will have opinions on what to do going forward. That's all I have to say. Now we have another person coming up.
Anybody have any questions on that? Okay, good. Thank you, Bill. And then now we have Theron Jacobson who's going to report on the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. Morning, commissioners, public, and staff. My name is Theron Jacobson, project engineer with the district. I'm here to speak on the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor Mineral Point Extension pipe investigation. Man, is it just arrows? Thank you. Oh, a little more techie.
Yeah.
So the agenda, we'll go over the location, the investigation, the action items to date and presently occurring, and then I'll take any questions. So Lisa alluded to the rough location of this as part of the Pumping Station 17 Force Main Relief Phase 2 project. This is a Google snip of the investigation location, which is along 18151, that is on the southwest side of our service area, and the X with the circle around and with the arrow dot is the exact location of where the work is occurring right now, that is north of the Military Ridge State Trail and the highway. And this is just adjacent to the most downstream connection point of the Pumping Station 17 relief pipe that is currently under construction as part of that project. So this is a blow up of our collection system with the investigation location on it. All the flow here flows to Pumping Station 12, which is on Fitzgerald Road. The new relief line that was put in is actually at the bottom of the page that is labeled PS17 Relief. That's an active construction project. So the actual investigation location is not on the new pipe. It is on the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor that was constructed in 1968. So why are we here? Why are we talking? I was on a site visit, and that photo was taken on Friday the 12th. I actually noticed it the day before. There was a collapse of the grade over the existing pipe just adjacent to a new manhole, most downstream manhole that connected to the Nine Springs Valley Interceptor, which you can see in the background of the lid of the structure, the concrete and the shadow. The green paint around it is just a mark for me to see if the area is growing over time, which luckily it hasn't since this was noticed. So and then here is our issue. So we had to do 2 rounds of televising. The first round happened the Monday following the initial findings, and that video was inconclusive because of the flow in the pipe was so great. We couldn't get a good visual of what was occurring, but we knew there was an issue because there was debris visually. And then we were able to follow up with an additional televising that Friday during low flows in the early morning on Friday. And the most top part of the screen there that I got labeled the top of pipe inside, that is a pipe that we connected to. And as you can see, there's a joint failure that we have with an offset joint. As you can see, the next receiving pipe is about a foot lower. Basically, there's a joint shear that occurred. Just for scale purposes, the wall thickness on that pipe is about 4.5 inches, so we got about a foot offset joint right there. Hence, we need to act and come up with a plan to fix this issue. And this is looking downstream, so easterly on the collection system. So what's happened to date? Televising investigations that I've already mentioned. The contractor that actually is working on the relief project, Pumping Station 17, is working with us to basically put in a bypass flow system. I'm doing daily monitoring of surface observations and flow monitoring within our system, and providing certain staff with daily updates on progress, when things are happening, what's occurring, and next steps. So the items that are actually in progress, pumps are already on site. Photos that I provided here were actually from Tuesday. Additional equipment was mobilized on Wednesday, so yesterday, and they're actually, most of the pipe is fused out there for the bypass system. So we're hoping that's operational within the next 24 to 36 hours. But I will know more as the day progresses. And once the system is operational, we're going to do a further pipe investigation between that whole run and then perform a joint repair. Right now, we know there's one at this location. We can't see beyond that, so we don't know if there's another one just downstream at the next pipe joint. So hoping there's not, but we'll know more once we get it televised early next week. Repair it, clean and inspect it, and then restore the site, and then reintroduce flow into the section. I will take any questions from any of the commissioners.
Anybody have any questions, Greg? I just have one. Theron, what are we talking about in terms of bypass flow?
Yep. So, for instance, this is from 716 to 722. The flow to the plant was about 50 MGD, and the flow at station 12 was just under 7. So it's about 14% of a total flow. So that we got 3 of those pumps on site that you're visualizing right there that have a capacity of about 9 MGD.
So put that in what does that turn into CFS? My world is, I'm just trying to.
I did the, yeah.
A lot.
It's
That's
a lot.
what I'm thinking, yeah.
It's a lot. I did the numbers.
What size pumps are those? Are they like?
Remove this table. It's those 3 tables right there, visually, for one.
Okay.
So they're
Thank you.
sizable.
Does this turn into an SSO? Are we losing effluent to the environment and have to go through that whole regulatory side process, or no?
There's nothing at this point that's visually, the water is still moving through there. I'm visually looking at it each day. The station 12 is still pumping under normal conditions. You can see the pattern. So, no, I mean, the groundwater is fluctuating around this area, but everything's contained within the pipe because the structure that we set is literally 10 feet just upstream of this pipe impact.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That takes us to Alan with operations report.
Good morning, Commissioners. Alan Grooms, Operations Manager for the district, and I'll be doing the June operations report. Should be able to do that. There we go. I said last meeting that boring report is a good report, and this one's going to be fairly short and self-explanatory, I think. All of our performance metrics were good. Plant performance has been pretty good this summer. The higher flows, I might argue, have benefited us a little bit. We've struggled a little bit less with some of the solids issues because of that. At least that's my take on it, assessment of it. But everything, as you can see up here, our key effluent parameters are all at or below historical norms. None of them are above. They're all really in good shape. You know, total suspended solids and phosphorus are both just the bottom edge of their, you know, historical. And that range reflects basically a 3-year range. So those shaded areas, just for perspective. So we're performing really good at the plant. I know we've had a long meeting, so I won't spend a lot of time on this unless somebody's got specific questions or things they'd like to ask.
Right. Sorry. So Ellen, I heard Theron just say is the plant pumping 50 million? Are we running 50 million gallons per day right now?
Right now I don't know precisely what we're running at the moment, but yeah, it's like we're averaging right around 50 at the moment. It came up at the very end of June, probably that last 5 days of the month of June started to come up. The ground is fairly saturated right now. I would characterize this as the word I like to use. It's very responsive. That rain we had on, you know, earlier when we were so dry, we could get an inch or more rain. It didn't move the needle. Now it's like we got that short, intense rain on Monday. It really spiked up. So very rapidly. So we're seeing, you know, like I said, a very reactive system right now, which is fine. We can kind of prepare and anticipate that. But
and just correct me if I'm wrong. Last year, when we were still in our reduced rainfall period, we were running more like 38, 39, right? So we're seeing not quite a 10%, or not quite a, I guess it would be 20% increase in flow from this weird summer that we're having so far.
Yeah, that's correct. It's you know, as a short-term basis, the flows have kind of been coming down. You know, over the course, they'll kind of gradually work their way out as we get past an event. And you know, I would guess that our daily average day will be slightly under 50. Long-term average, we usually had been in that 40 to 42 range. We kind of had to break ourselves with that because that dry spell, we did get down to about 36, 37. But as I've said before, I'm a big fan of the law of averages, and I think we're just catching back up. I don't necessarily anticipate that we're going to, over the course of the year, be averaging something like 50, but I would expect something more historical norm, say 42 for the year maybe. I don't know if I'm placing a bet right now for something that we won't know till January, but.
Okay. Anyone else? Thank you very much, Alan. The newspaper reported that May and June were the wettest months, 2 months ever for both May and June. The wettest ever recorded, even though neither broke the individual record month, but together they were. Okay, that takes us to Paul. What do you have?
Well, hello. Here is your midday legal and regulatory update. I'll keep it short. On the regulatory side, in the month of June, we focused a little bit of attention on Grass Lake, berm issues, some of the PFAS updates and phase 2 items, and of course, Badger Mill Creek. Actually, our largest area of items was a variety of contract matters. There were some construction contracts, some bidding questions. We had a jurisdictional offer, some easement documents, an equipment lease, and some specific projects like public market that really occupied quite a bit of time. A couple of human resource issues and you know, the usual general questions, some open meetings related. We had a conflict issue that we needed to resolve and a few other things. But it was, you know, as we tried to target about 35 hours a month, this was another month where we were at a little over 50 hours. So busy month on a lot of areas. But given the time, I'll end there unless there's any questions.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Anybody have any questions? Don't see any hands up. Thanks, Paul. Okay, that takes us to the future meeting schedule, which is in the packet. I would advise people, I know we're going to have 3 people missing the 8/8 meeting, so if anybody's going to be missing a meeting coming up, let us know so we make sure we don't have quorum issues. Then our next two meetings at least will be at 9 a.m. because the subcommittee will be meeting, as reported earlier, at 7:30 a.m. on 8/8 and 8/22. So any other business? Tom?
I would move we adjourn.
Motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by,
Second.
second by the Commissioner Clark, same color shirt. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you.